Well, it's a joy to have Tim Challies on the podcast again today, and he's been with us. We've talked a little bit about his new book, Epic, and also we're going to be talking about his expertise on media. So he is the husband to Eileen, father of 3 children who are now 14 to 20. He's a well-known Christian blogger and author. And our other episode, we talked about his most recent book, Epic, an around the world journey through Christian history. And I should say, near and dear to my heart, you serve as an elder at Grace Fellowship Church. So just, being a pastor as well. And I think that really informs a lot of things. So welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Well, you've written the next story, Faith, Friends, Family in the Digital World, in which you think about media. You've been a long time blogger, and I believe in the next story say you actually love or technology there.
Yeah.
So we were going to have you in Providence to speak here on navigating media, and we still are. So that is we still are. But anyway, in the meantime, I have you for a few minutes on the podcast to talk about media. So tell me a little bit about why you wrote the next story, Faith, Friends, and Family.
Yeah, that's the second edition of the book you got there. The first
Yeah.
one had the subtitle Life and Faith After the Digital Explosion. So
Yeah.
I still reference that as sort of the end to the question is we had just gone through a digital explosion as a culture. Suddenly, so many things that were done in one way were being done in another, or ways we entertained ourselves. We had switched to new forms of entertainment, new forms of gaining information, and so on. And I was just curious as to what it was doing to me, how I was going to raise a family in this new world, and just the effect it was having on the church. All of these things was all very new. And so I started looking around and found there really wasn't much. Christians had not yet really put a lot of thought into what's it like to live in a digital world? What is this changing? And so I just ended up doing the research myself and writing that book as much as anything as a personal project, trying to guide myself and my family.
Well, talk a little bit about how some of the things you've tried to do to shepherd your own soul. Maybe that's changed because the first book came out in 2011, right? So here we are 9 years later, and obviously things have changed a huge amount, and you've come out with a second edition. So what are some things you try and do to shepherd your own soul? And then we can talk about your family.
Yeah, things have changed so much, and things still are changing so much. There's discussions we're having today we couldn't have imagined having even the day I wrote that book. We're seeing artificial intelligence take great leaps forward. We're seeing censorship or things like it really pressing in today. So there's a whole lot of issues that I didn't cover. In terms of how I'm dealing with it as a family level, I think just same as everyone else, with lots of success and lots of failure, with lots of feeling good about it and lots of feeling guilt about it. I kind of think the next generation of parents, my son is 20, let's say 5 or 6 years from now, he's starting to raise kids. I think they'll have a big leg up because not only was he born digital, essentially born into a digital world, but also hopefully things have stabilized a little bit. On the other hand, you, me, we are raising the first generation of digital kids, and we're just learning how to do it. No generation before us has had to wonder at what age is it appropriate for a kid to have Instagram, or at what age should a kid have a tiny little pocket computer they can carry around with them 24/7. These are new things we're dealing with, and all of us are going to make some bad decisions. We'll be too free, too lax, we'll be too tight, and our kids won't be properly prepared to properly discipled in using technology. So I think we all need a lot of grace for ourselves and for one another as we attempt to do our best in a very new situation.
That's that's so encouraging to hear, because I would say as I was raising my kids, they're coming in. I can remember the whole deal of should our daughter get a Facebook? So not even having to prepare for that, it's just thrust upon us. Or I can remember my kids doing a YouTube video with some other friends, like an action video, and the moms having some concern about throwing this up on YouTube, this whole privacy thing. So so certainly we've gotten older and feeling like I made mistakes, and so it's encouraging to hear you say it's a mix.
Yeah, and some of these things, when I was a kid, there was Dungeons and Dragons, and everyone was convinced kids were going to get into this thing and then behave in a certain way. They were going to murder their parents or something like that. And then when my kids were very young, it was Harry Potter. Parents are sort of deciding, can we allow our kids to do that? And all these projections about where it would take them. Um, most of which I think were unfounded in the end. I don't think there is an epidemic of parent murder after Dungeons and Dragons, and of witchcraft after Harry Potter. And I think for us, Instagram or Facebook were some of these things where we were really, really concerned about giving them to our kids. In some ways, found it probably wasn't worth all the analysis we put into it or all the self doubt we had toward it. And in a sense, it's irrelevant. Our kids don't want to be on Facebook anymore. Now the only people who want them on Facebook are the youth leaders, so they know how to communicate with them. But the
Yeah,
kids don't want to be on Facebook because you're on it and I'm on it, so it's not fun
exactly. Well,
anymore.
exactly. Yeah, no, I get that. Well, talk a little bit. Can we go back to how it's affected, or how you shepherd your own soul? Because I found I have felt my brain changing. I have to force myself to read a book as a as the ad called it, as opposed to a Kindle, or even my phone. And do you have some habits to cultivate the written word, or are you able to enjoy the digital things without any sense of loss?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot going on there. I think we blame things on technology that are actually probably our fault. So I'm 10 years older than I was before digital books came along. If I do find it harder to concentrate, it may just be the weight of life weighing me down. It may be that I've read so many books, it's hard to get, you've read 8 books on marriage, it's hard to get too enthusiastic about the ninth,
You're saying I'm just old, basically.
I'm wondering if partly we're just old. Yeah, if that's just part of it, and we're blaming it technology when really technology is not at fault. That said, we do have so much entertainment around us all at all times, and so much distraction. It does stand to reason that that's at least part of what's going on. I've certainly found it harder to read at periods of time than in the past. I'm not totally willing to blame my phone, but I suspect it's part of that equation. I've gone back and forth between Kindle and paper printed books. Generally, I find that light reading I'm happy to do on my Kindle. More in-depth reading, there's still something about the tactile nature of a book that I find more helpful. That said, it sure is nice to be able to just click and highlight things and then export them all and have a big list of all my highlights. So there's
Yeah.
no perfect solution. We tend to regard, there's actually a book called, I think, The Perfect Technology or something. It was about the book, thinking that the printed book was the perfect technology, but it's not. There's lots of drawbacks with books. So we can adapt. We can have our technology evolve, and we'll adapt accordingly.
That's good. Yeah, one of the, well, somewhat related, one of the things that you brought up in the book, which is just really helpful, was to think about data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Talk a little bit about that, how those are different, and just maybe even communicating that with our kids. Again, thinking the
Yeah.
focus of this is discipling our kids.
Yeah, so I think in the past, and you'd have to read some Neil Postman or Marshall McLuhan to get more on this, but in the past, information was meant to serve a purpose. So information wasn't the end, it was the means to the end. The means, or what you wanted to do with information, was to work toward knowledge, which is lessons you can apply to live a better life. And then from there to wisdom, which is applying divine wisdom to your life. So now you're living well before God and man. Today, we're surrounded by information, deluged with data, and all of that doesn't really do us any good. As I think if you spend so much time on Twitter, or right now in this pandemic we're going through, there is so much information out there. Here are the raw facts, the data of it, or here's a rough interpretation of that information. But that does me no good when it comes to how I'm to live my life and guide my family, or how I'm to live according to God's wisdom. So I think we got to just keep shifting things along there. If I'm deluged with information, that's not helping me live well, live better, then maybe I should turn off that source of information and look somewhere else instead.
Well, and I want, yeah, that's great. And then I also wonder, just casting a vision for our children to say information is not knowledge and wisdom. And of course,
Mhm.
Proverbs is cries out and says, get wisdom, get wisdom. And so that's,
Yeah, there's lots of people who would win Jeopardy that the Bible would say you're a fool. These are different things. You can have great information, stores of information in your mind, but still live a terrible, dissolute, God dishonoring life.
I have to tell you, the first thought when you said that in my mind was, well, that's tweetable right there. So,
Right.
um,
Well, isn't that an interesting thing? How once Twitter came into our lives, we started to think Twitterly. We started to think about, like, can I distill that down to 140 and then 280 characters? Which you realize the Puritans were doing 400 years ago. You read any Puritan author, they always take a big idea and crunch it down to a sentence. So it's a fantastic form of communication. But now that we have the ability, we find ourselves pushed there by our technologies. Just as when when you use Instagram, everything becomes a photo op. So you can put it out on Instagram. Everything you go through in life, you're wondering if you can get a photo out of this.
well, yeah, those, they're two different things. I want to go both places. Let's talk a little bit about how, with all this information, as a result, our kids are growing up with sort of this idea of truth by consensus, or just there's no authoritative word, and really, I would think, and we're drowning because we have so many opinions. It's hard to hear. Here's what God, the ultimate expert, says, or here we are in this pandemic. Who are the experts we trust? You know.
Yeah, the democratization of information, and in a sense, the democratization of authority has been fascinating to see from a theological perspective. How you can have a man who dedicates his entire life to the study of theology, yet in the end, his word counts less than the person who knows nothing about theology but has more followers. So you'll go online and see somebody who's got great wisdom, great knowledge, great credentials. He'll post something, and then immediately somebody will come up behind him and just kind of say something obnoxious and ridiculous. But he's got 300,000 followers. The other guy's got 3,000. So we're in a very anti-authoritarian age right now, in an age where we're suspicious, for some reason, suspicious of expertise. We see that theologically. As I've said before, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. If you go and find some of the foremost epidemiologists in the world, they're on Twitter, and see how people respond to their expertise, you realize this is society wide. People think that having a little bit of knowledge but a big audience somehow trumps having small audience but great knowledge. It's fascinating.
I assume in that last sentence there wasn't a political illusion going on as well. So we'll, with the idea that it trumps it. But anyway,
Oh,
we'll keep. You're
I'm in a
Canadian, so
different country than you, my
I
friend.
started to say we're in a different country. So you're in a different country, so you
Yep.
wouldn't have done that. But have you done anything specific? Have you, thinking about this with your kids, or even in the church, maybe as you shepherd people? Have you articulated this, or have you how have you tried to influence to others
I
that way?
hope what I've done is model to my kids proper subjection to authority, or proper submission to authority. Authority comes from God. And so that's primarily towards parents, pastors, politicians, that kind of thing, where bodies that are established by the Lord. But there also is authority that comes with knowledge. And if you have little knowledge, you have little authority on a given topic. So I really wanted to raise my kids in such a way that they don't they're not constantly striving against authority. And again, whether that's authority given by God or authority that comes through greater knowledge and greater wisdom.
Well, so that's excellent, and at the same time, you also have Jesus saying, talking about, "I praise you, Father, you've hidden these things from the wise and learned." So when it comes to the apologetic of the Christian faith, sometimes the seduction, there's the also the seduction of knowledge. So that, there's that
Yeah.
tension. It seems like we're trying to raise them to ask what is who is how much knowledge is behind this, and yet there's that tension there. Well, you
Yeah, well, I
talked
think
about.
our core thing as parents, our core responsibility as parents is to teach our kids to just be constantly asking, what does the Bible say? If our kids can just be constantly asking that question about big decisions in life, theological questions, epistemological issues, whatever it is, just what does the Bible say and why am I not already doing it? They'll be okay in life, It's just a
Yeah,
very
yeah,
core skill that can
yeah,
see then past those who have great knowledge or great worldly wisdom, but are still fools in the eyes of God.
yeah. I think, yes, I agree 100%. And to me, really, as part of this discussion, part of the, I think, challenge is with that deluge of information, then the authority of the Bible gets watered down. So
Yeah.
it becomes one of the many sources. And oh, am I okay? I read my Bible for 3 minutes, and now I'm deluged with all these other information. So yeah, that's just, I think that's a challenge. Well, you used the word in the next story. You said we've all become exhibitionists and voyeurs, and so those are nice word choice there. Definitely some charged words, but I feel that in terms of just the lack of modesty. Just modesty is not just about your physical body, it's just not telling everybody everything. Talk a little bit about that, again, thinking about just maybe some things you said to your kids, things you tried to practice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So obviously, exhibitionism and voyeurism both have negative or sexual connotations, but the behind the words is this idea that we all show off ourselves. Meanwhile, we all want to see others show off. We want to gaze at other people, see behind the curtain, the clothing, whatever it is. And I think social media has given us the ability to show off a version of ourselves we want other people to see. It's also given us a prying eye into other people's lives. And so you ask personally, what are some of these things I do? I I have the ability through conferences and stuff to meet some of the heroes of the faith, the contemporary heroes of the faith. According to the quote unquote textbook, I should always be taking photos of myself with these people. But I've just found, and I used to do that, but after a while, I started to ask, what am I doing? What is this? What's the purpose behind this? And I realized it's an exhibitionist tendency. I'm trying to show off who I am, or I'm trying to gain credibility by my association with other people and so on. And I've really massively cut back on any kind of that, talking about the things I do or showing the things I do, because I don't think it's serving other people. It's not showing love to other people. It's showing love to me. It's trying to build my own reputation or build myself up in the eyes of other people. That's not why everybody does it, but that's the only reason I could wrap my head around why I would do it. Meanwhile, if I know if I put information like that out there or photos out there, people want to see that. They want to see behind the curtain. Some of that is natural and good. We want to learn about Charles Spurgeon's life because we want to learn about Josiah Henson, all these people we talked about in our last podcast together, and that's well and good. That's what we do in church history. But we got to be careful as well that we don't pry into what's secret and I think you are helpful using the word modest. There is an immodesty to a lot of this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And what's cool about what you're talking about is that you were self-evaluating why you were doing it. And so I mean, our family, we have, as I'm sure many families have, we have our own text string now that my kids are, in their 20s, and so we use it to kind of brag about ourselves to each other, to our family, and it's just,
Yeah.
it's very natural that you would do that at dinner. You'd say, hey, I did this today, or I got an A on my paper, or whatever. And that's to me, that's a lot more appropriate than uh again, maybe throwing it up on Instagram. And then, as you mentioned before, a couple times before, what happens then, and we've seen it, is your motive for doing things actually starts to change. So
Mhm.
you're actually there to take the picture, to brag, and you forget to even participate
Yeah.
uh with what you're doing there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's very perplexing, and I think it can be very concerning. And I certainly can't say why others are doing it or tell them to do it as I do. But one thing I do know is when it comes to social media, is what we put out there doesn't reflect reality; it reflects our desired reality. So what you see of me on Facebook is only what I want you to know about me. I'm not going to show you at my worst. I'm not going to show my family at its worst. But conversely, when I see your family on Facebook, I believe that's real, not a fictionalized version. And so I know that I'm lying, but I think you're telling the truth. And so there's a lot of comparison, and we always lose that comparison. And then we feel miserable about ourselves. And I think that's extremely unhelpful as well.
Yeah, that's why the all this anxiety is there. That's really insightful. Yeah, because we know the mess. Every family's messy. I mean, that's why I've said that over and over.
Yeah.
Every family is messy.
Yeah,
I used to say as a
absolutely.
I used to say as a pastor, I may not know what your mess is. You may not have shared it with me, but I know it's messy. You know.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you don't have to share it. That's the thing. We all have our own little, we have our conflicts, we have our rebellions, we have our sins, we have our foibles, and that doesn't need to be broadcast. It's often not helpful to
Yeah.
broadcast that. We work that out. We learn to repent before one another and before the Lord, and yeah, each one before the Lord.
Well, talk a little bit. Your last chapter was really helpful. So you talked about you had three. You talked about your family plan. So the three broad goals you had, and the three types of devices, and then some things you did. We won't get into all the weeds of the technical things you recommend, but yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was actually the big distinction between version one and version two of the book, was trying to add a plan at the end where people could actually implement something in their families. And I can say this was the plan we first implemented in our family and have pretty much stuck to it, which is just a plan to help monitor technology, help introduce technology, and then help monitor its use over time. I gotta say, as my kids get older, I do a whole lot less of that. I'm not interested in monitoring the internet usage of my 20-year-old son. He's, I kind of figure we as parents, we give our children every chance to succeed, and then we let them succeed or fail. We're not going to let them fail massively, but still, by the time our kids are ready to go off to college, hopefully we're not overseeing them too tightly, because they got to learn to stand on their own. So it's a plan for when your kids are young, helping them, discipling them in their use of technology. So by the time they're into their mid to late teens and getting ready to head off to college, hopefully you've at least given them the tools to succeed. Whether they're going to or not, that's not really in your hands. But at least you've equipped them, which is what all family discipleship is, isn't it? It's giving your kids the opportunity to succeed, the tools they need, and then they'll decide on their own whether to follow the Lord or whether to follow their parents or not.
Right. Right. Yeah, for you again, just it was very helpful where you talk about three broad goals to train them to use the internet and devices responsibly, which is just that's what we're trying to do. Guard them, second goal, from seeing or experiencing what they don't know exists, which is appropriate at a certain age, and then prevent children from seeing what they desire once they learn that it exists. So that's just fighting sin.
Yeah.
And then of course the devices, and again, this is our kids, my kids were just in front of this, but because the fixed devices, and that was always the issue, putting the TV that had, or the monitor that had the internet in a public place. But now of course we've got mobile and then other people's devices.
Right, right. So I think when the internet was relatively new, probably when I wrote the first edition of that book, things were easier. There was a family computer, on the whole, family computer. If you put boundaries on that family computer, you're probably doing okay. But everything changed when the internet went mobile. Today, well over half the pornography in the world is consumed on tiny little glowing rectangles, not much bigger glowing rectangles. It's being consumed in private places, privately. And so the battle for parents has really shifted. But I've got a lot of confidence. I used to go around, and one thing I would say at every setting I went to, every speech I gave was, if you're a male between the ages of 18 and 25 and have never once gone looking for pornography, please come and talk to me afterwards. I'd just like to hear what your parents did or what you did. And one time I had one guy come up to dispute the definition of pornography, but I never had anybody. So I could not find this. It's not a perfect study by any means, but no guy ever came up to say, I've never looked at pornography. But I'm starting to see it now, where parents who are about my age probably, which were kind of the first generation to raise kids once covenant eyes was widespread, once we knew about the evils of pornography or through technology. I think we're starting to see parents do a whole lot better there. My parents and that generation had no knowledge of what would happen, so they were ignorant in the sense they just didn't know. But I think today's parents are much more informed and taking much better steps, measures.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I appreciate again your thinking on this and your writing on this, and just it's helpful. It's helpful to get our mind around it. Just yeah. So the internet screens are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. They're here to stay. Have transformed our
Yeah.
world, and it's really helpful to help us disciple our kids. So
Yeah, and we're not going back. We're not going back to that old world. We'll never be back there. So we just have to learn to live in this one.
yeah, that's helpful. Well, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. And the book is The Next Story, Faith, Friends, and Family in the Digital World. It's very helpful just to think about how to, about information, media, and our relationship to technology. So thanks for writing it.
Good. And I hope I can deliver some of this content at your church in the future.
Yes, amen.